We're studying Wild Moments in the Life of Jesus. And today, last week we talked about the temptations of Jesus. And all of a sudden, that's not working. That's not working. Right now? Okay, working. That's good. And so today we're going to talk about mysteries, things we may not fully understand about the temptations of Jesus. And that will be found, of course, the temptations are found in Matthew chapter 4, 1 through 11, Mark 1, 12 and 13, Luke 4, 1 through 13. I know a preacher. He actually preached here many years ago, John Dale, a really good preacher back up in my area, Tennessee, Kentucky area. He said he kept a list of Bible questions that he wanted to get answered when he got to heaven. And if I had a list like that, which I don't, but if I did, then I think some of the questions might involve the various mysteries found in the temptations of Jesus. So in this lesson, we're going to look at a number of those mysteries. 3 for sure. The fourth one is not quite so much of a mystery. But we're going to look at those and give you some possible explanations and or opinions. Now, obviously we can never compromise the truth. But when it comes to opinion, we always need to allow for the opinions that differ from our own. Now, having said that, though, even our opinion should be more than just mere guesses. Just, this is what I think. This is what it appears to be to me. Our opinion should have at least some biblical basis in biblical truth. It should have some basis in biblical truth. It's not working again.
Did y'all change the USB thing out? Yeah. Okay. Is it on, Daddy, on the side?
It is. There it is. Yep. It's green.
That's the simplest thing I know.
Yeah. Is it plugged in?
Yeah, it's plugged in. It's on. It does have 2 batteries. I changed those recently.
The first question is, in what form did Satan present himself to Jesus? Now, what I want to do is I'll go through what I want to talk about, and then after I get done with that question, then I'm going to open the floor up and see what you think about it. In what form did Satan present himself to Jesus? Now, the first temptation is described. Can you hit that for me one more? I must have a battery issue. You think it's battery here?
No, it's up here. It's up here but it's not up here.
Technical difficulties. They tend to follow me around.
Well, just talk. We need to change it.
Well, I was hoping that we could see all this, but we'll go ahead with the first temptation. The first temptation is found in Matthew chapter 4, verses 3 through 4. It says, "Now when the tempter came to him," and if we had a picture, that would be underlined. "When the tempter came to him, he said, 'If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread.' But he answered and said, 'It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God.'" Notice that the scripture says the tempter Satan came to Jesus, who was hungry because of being 40 days in the wilderness fasting. And Satan tempted him to prove that he was the Son of God by turning stones to bread. What I want you to know is this. or what question I want to talk about this morning is this. In what form did Jesus come to Jesus? Did Satan come to Jesus? Sorry. Did he come in a visible form? Perhaps as a human to tempt Jesus? Or was that encounter entirely in the spiritual realm? Or did Satan pose his challenge to the mind of Christ, similar to how Satan often tempts you and me today? Let me give you my opinion, and then we'll see if you agree with this. This encounter of Jesus with Satan has all the earmarks of a visible, physical, and vocal interaction. The tempter came. Thank you. The tempter came. I got those underlined. The tempters came to him. The tempter said to Jesus, he vocalized his challenge, and Jesus answered him. Now, these are common actions that humans do when interacting with one another. So it seems to me that Satan came to Jesus in a visible form. May not have been a human form, but it was certainly a visible form, it seems like to me. Certainly we know that Satan is a fallen angel. And he is not, nor has he ever been, flesh and blood. And we know that he normally operates in the spiritual realm. But angels, in particular the angels of God, have also been known to take visible form and or human appearance. For example, 2 angels in the appearance of men went to Sodom to save Abraham's nephew Lot and his family, to save them from the imminent destruction of the city of Sodom. And we find this in Genesis 19. Also, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, angels bringing tidings of Jesus' birth were made visible to a group of country shepherds living out in the fields. And they obviously appeared as angels and not in human form. We should also notice the reading in 2 Corinthians 11, 13 through 15. It says, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Jesus. And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works." That's a wow moment for all of us, because God limits the power of Satan. It would make sense that Satan, as an angel, had the ability to take on visible form as well as the angels we just saw in the scriptures. Scripture even says that Satan and his angels are capable, remember, capable of transforming themselves and appearing to be angels of light, ministers of righteousness, and apostles of Christ. So it seems to me that Satan took on visible form to interact with Jesus. It may not have been necessarily a human-like form, but it was a visible form, it seems like to me. And I'm opening it up to see what everybody else thinks. No comments? Yeah.
Jesus recognized it right away. And I wonder if his kind of, I know this is human, but if his heart just sunk, or if he thought, man, I must be doing good if Satan himself has shown up right here. You know, I mean, you think about him having a human type reaction to seeing the devil standing right in front of him. And I think that would be interesting to be inside Jesus' mind right then.
It'd probably be good if Satan showed up and we could see him when he was tempting us. We might resist him better if that was the case.
I think, well, I must be strong if they've sent the main man in, you know.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, let's go on to question 2 then. Question 2. How did Satan transport Jesus from between the various temptations? The second temptation of Jesus is recording in Matthew 4, verses 5 through 7. It said, "Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, He shall give His angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone.' Jesus said to him, 'It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God.'" So the scripture says that the devil took him up, took Jesus up, took him up to the pinnacle. And he set him on that pinnacle of the temple. Let me remind you that the first temptation was in the wilderness of Judea. And this second temptation is at the temple in Jerusalem. And the third temptation will be on a high mountain, which is most likely in a third remote location. So how did Satan get Jesus to Jerusalem and to the high mountain? Number one could be that they walked. Number two, Satan used his power to transport Jesus in a moment of time to these places. And number three is Jesus used his own power to willingly transport himself and the devil to the temple and to the mountain so that he could defeat Satan's temptations, his challenges. Now, one of my commentaries, Barnes' Notes on the New Testament, suggests that there is no evidence to imply that Satan had the power to transport Jesus in a moment of time to the temple or to the high mountain. Barnes comments that the phrase "took him up" simply means that Satan conducted Jesus to these places. And Barnes implies that they walked. You know, it was likely a day's journey to the temple at Jerusalem from the wilderness. And depending on how rugged the terrain was, the high mountain on the third temptation was perhaps more than a day's journey, assuming that the mountain could even be climbed. I must admit, for all the times that I have read about the temptations of Christ, that walking to the temple and then to the mountain never crossed my mind. I was always under the impression that the changes in locations of these temptations occurred in a moment of time and did not significantly impact the 40 days of temptation, which walking to these locations would have. In my humble opinion, walking to these places is not a good option.
Well, we know that Jesus was human, he's tired just like we did.
Yeah.
We do.
Sure.
So it's most likely you're right.
Okay, so if walking is not a good option, did Satan use his own power to transport Jesus in a moment of time to these places? Let me say up front that I believe that the scripture does teach that Satan's power is limited by God's authority. Remember 1 Corinthians 10, verses 12 through 13. It says, "Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it." That's another wow moment for us. Thankfully, Satan's power is limited by God. And there is no scriptural evidence that Satan normally had the power to transport people he tempts to a different location in a moment of time. That would be power over space and time. Yes?
There are examples throughout the Old Testament of angels doing that. He was not only an angel, but he was the head angel in a sense, according to Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. So, yeah, I think he definitely had the power to do that. It doesn't matter either way. I realize that. However, yeah, I think he had the power to do that.
Okay.
Based on those Old Testament examples of that, of angels doing that. I don't know how head of evil could not have the power that the angels have.
But he's limited. God
Well,
is
sure.
limited him. Yeah. So he doesn't have all the power that he needs to carry us to hell, because there's always a way of escape. But I'm good. Okay. Can you name an example? Because I didn't know there was an example.
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
I've done studies on angels, though. I do know there are several examples of it. I just, not off the top of my head, I don't.
Transporting people from one location to another.
Transporting themselves.
Okay. 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 Having said that, I don't believe that Satan had power over space and time. Having said that, I want you to remember the book of Job. Remember the book of Job, where God gave Satan special power to inflict unusual, horrific sufferings upon Job to test his faithfulness. And that's in Job's chapter 1 and 2. I think that these things happened to Job, and they were written down so that we could learn from them. So to help us learn from these particular temptations of Jesus, God may have given Satan, if he didn't already have the power, which I don't think he did personally, God may have given Satan the special power to transport Jesus to these various locations in a moment of time. But there is a third alternative. Satan and Jesus were transported to the temple and to the mountain by the power of Jesus. Now we know that Jesus, as God's Son, he absolutely did have the power over space and time. He actually demonstrated that power in John chapter 6. If you remember, in that instance, Jesus instructed the 12 disciples to get into their boat without him and journey over the Sea of Galilee toward Capernaum. But during the night, when the disciples had rowed the boat a long distance from land, a strong wind came up against them. The waves began to batter their boat, and it caused them to strain severely at rowing. It was at that moment, during the early morning hours, that Jesus came walking to them on the stormy sea to his disciples. The disciples were terrified of this strange figure that was coming toward them in the dark. But Jesus calmed their fears when he says, "It is I." And when Jesus got into the boat, the wind ceased, the waves calmed, and the disciples worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." It was then that Jesus displayed his power over space and time. John 6:21, the last part of that verse says, "And immediately the ship was at land whither they went." So the boat went from the middle of the Galilean Sea to Capernaum immediately, or in a moment of time. And that is certainly a wow experience. Yes?
Like I said, I don't think it matters. I mean, it's a good discussion.
Well, that's what this is about, having a good discussion.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But it does say, here in Matthew 4, 5, and also again in verse 8, that the devil took him.
Right.
Well, it sounds like the devil took him instead of Jesus doing the taking.
Okay, I mentioned three things. And Jesus had the ability to control space and time. And maybe he did this, but it does say that Satan took Jesus. So in my humble opinion, it seems more likely that God gave Satan the ability to transport Jesus to the various locations in a moment of time. You just need to let me finish.
My bad.
I was giving you three alternatives. And sometimes you pick the third alternative, but in this case, I was picking the second alternative. Okay? Anything else? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I interrupted you. Okay. Any other ideas, opinions? Yeah.
I need some clarification back to the time of the devil taking him to the pinnacle. Okay? Somewhere, somehow, wasn't the pinnacle 600 feet tall?
It was pinnacle means wing or extremity, and it was at the temple, and the highest point on the temple was like 600 feet above Kidron Valley.
Okay. Could it be assumed that this is where the devil took Jesus?
You can,
Somewhere
yeah.
in
Yeah.
that locale.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a long, long way to fall.
Right.
And we're also looking at a long, long way to get up. Because it said he took him up.
And it said that he set him on the pinnacle.
He set him there. So this is just X version, okay? Keeping in mind that Jesus was flesh and blood at this time. Of course, he was the three, but keeping in mind that he's flesh and blood. So I can just see a super devil, like we all saw Superman on TV, actually taking Jesus and sitting him there. This is when we study this. This is what I'm seeing in my own mind. Mm-hmm. So when I see that, because I see the place that he chose, and the temptation so far of him falling or jumping down, it's just hard to fathom without seeing actually him escorting him up, just physically taking him there, and like Mark said, and sitting him down. So that's.
Hungry, and he was thirsty, and he was weak.
Okay.
One time I saw in a movie,
Now, I didn't intend to open up a keg of worms, but this is just the way that I
think-
could see it be envisioned, because I don't. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but
My question too is, how is Satan going to tempt Jesus if he can't do?
if he can't,
Get him up to the
Right.
pinnacle, why? How's that a temptation to Jesus?
well, it wouldn't be a temptation if he didn't have the ability to do it, to give in to it. It wouldn't be a temptation if it wasn't something that the devil thought he could give in to. Yes.
I don't like to think that Satan touched Jesus in any way, that it was done under whatever power. And
Okay.
here, Mark said that he set him on the pinnacle, and so I think it's just different versions of whatever, and it says that the devil took him into the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle. So he didn't put him there, he just instructed him, you get up there. I don't know.
Well, I think the
look at the Greek on that, because in the different translations, that's not very obvious. Because it's New King James, and it says said. What does that mean?
You're right, that's New King James.
well, if you think about Barnes' notes, which I just read, those things could be, well, he just conducted him. He didn't necessarily transfer him there magically. It was just, he just carried him. He walked him there. Okay, let's go here.
You might ask yourself questions too. What if any, would the fact that Jesus was 100% man here on earth have anything to do with these temptations?
Well, he was 100% man and 100% God, which is
Yeah.
kind of hard for us to grasp. So, why have the temptations if he couldn't fall?
Right.
So
That's the point I'm making.
that's the point. And whatever opinion that we have, we need to at least kind of base it on some kind of scriptural evidence. We just can't guess at it.
Right.
Okay.
Annie, I wanted to ask you, in James, the passage that you read last week, James chapter 1, it says God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. And yet there are references in Scripture that, and I think you read one of them earlier, that we're not supposed to tempt God. And I was wondering if maybe the way we understand tempt might be different depending on the context. Because verse 14 says, each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. And I mean, if we believe Jesus is 100% God, and I think everybody does in this room as well, that's the part I struggle with, and I think Henry was hinting at that. He's 100% God, 100% man, and yet I'm trying to understand how we're talking about the concept of Jesus being tempted, and yet this does not seem to fall under the definition that we see in verse 14. So I'm wondering how you answer that. I don't know the answer, and I'm just curious what your thought is.
Well, I think I just answered it. For me, at least, he was 100% God, yes. He's also 100% man, and man can be tempted. So that part of Jesus' nature was being tempted. So that sounds too simplistic, but that's...
Well,
you okay with that?
The title of your lesson today is talking about the mysteries of Jesus' temptation. Yeah. And to me, this falls under a mystery that's kind of hard for us to really grasp.
Right. That's why it's included. Yes. Things that we cannot necessarily answer and know for a fact. But whatever our opinions are, they do need to be based upon Scripture as much as we can. We just don't need to guess at it. That's the only thing. Okay. Let's go on.
I think James 1, what you're calling is kind of a general statement about God as opposed to Jesus as a specific example, being, that Philippians 2 said he emptied himself of those powers. And Hebrew writer says that he was tempted in all points, as we are. And Colossians 2:9 says he's the fullness of the Godhead bodily. So he put himself in that position where he could be tempted for us so that he could be that ultimate sacrifice for us. So my own opinion is the James 1 passage is more of a general that God cannot be tempted. He allowed himself to be tempted, though, for us, for our sake, in a specific way through Jesus.
I mean, I don't want to derail the class, but obviously there were verses in the Old Testament. I think it's Exodus and Deuteronomy. In fact, I think one of the passages we read, I can't remember which one. There's a cross-reference in my New King James that goes back to, I think it's Deuteronomy, where Moses had to strike the rock, and he was saying, "Why do you tempt God?" So obviously he's not talking about Jesus in that context. So what does that mean to tempt God? Obviously, if we're not talking about simply the 100% man Jesus in that context, what does it mean to tempt God? And I think maybe we're thinking of the word test some way, and so I wonder if that's kind of what we're looking at here in the New Testament with Jesus, is that it is another test, one that he obviously did not fail. I'm curious. I mean, I'm struggling with the idea that he actually could fail the test. And Danny, you're making the point, I think, that how is it a temptation if there was not a possibility that he would give into it? And yet I'm thinking about Jesus being 100% God, and it's completely contrary to his nature that he could sin. Giving into temptation would be a sin. So again, I don't know the answer. I'm just saying I read all this stuff, and I'm like trying to figure out how to justify all of it, or how it all comes together, because otherwise we would be saying that the Scripture has a contradiction, and I don't believe there's a contradiction. So we have to figure out in our own minds what the issue is, and it may not be that we can.
The passage there in Deuteronomy, the tempt there does mean test, and it has to do with his patience when put in the context. So it has more to do with testing God's patience of doing things my way, because of the situation there. So I don't think that's the same meaning at all as what we read about with Jesus, with the temptations.
Okay, well, that's why I was just wondering if it's even the same word. Anyway, sorry.
We'd have to look, because that's Hebrew and Greek.
Right. And I don't want to take over your class, Danny. I know you got a couple other points to make, but since we were kind of nibbling around the edges on there.
Okay. Good discussion?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We got We got one more question here before, at least one more before we need to go to worship service. And that question is, where is the exceeding high mountain of the third temptation? Now, Matthew 4, 8, and 9 gives us this third temptation of Jesus offered by Satan. It says, again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Now, the setting of the third temptation is on an exceedingly high mountain. Now, this description is far too limited for us to determine precisely where this mountain was located. But let me give you some possibilities, and in my humble opinion, I'll list those possibilities in the order with which I consider the greatest likelihood of it being that mount of temptation. I have a picture that's going to show up like 4 different times, but the arrow from the Mediterranean Sea, which is in the bottom right left, and you see the Dead Sea up on the top right, and you see the Galilean Sea up there in the Jordan River. Anyway, just trying to get you familiar with the map. But the arrow is pointing to a mountain which I think may be a good possibility. We know that the second temptation occurred on the Temple Mount, or Mount Moriah. Since Jerusalem was surrounded by 7 mountain peaks, the Mount of Temptation could be one of those peaks. The mountain peak with the highest elevation was Mount Scopas, which was 2,710 feet high. It was the northernmost peak of the Mount of Olives range. It's hard to see that. I don't get that fine detail, but that's kind of pointing at Jerusalem. And it was noted for having a great view, and militarily, it was sometimes used as a lookout position. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is up there in the top left-hand corner, and that's Mount Hermon. It's the highest elevation in Israel. It's 9,232 feet. It would certainly classify as exceedingly high. It is on the northern boundary of Israel and is north of the Sea of Galilee by 40 miles. It is also north of Jerusalem by approximately 120 miles. And its elevation obviously makes for great views. Some people think Mount Hermon was actually where the Transfiguration occurred. But it was the highest one, so that could be a possibility. Mount Nebo, which is actually east of the Jordan River. Mount Nebo, it's east of Jordan River and the Dead Sea, and Mount Nebo is 2,300 feet in elevation. And during the time of Moses was in the land of Moab. It is the place where God allowed Moses to view the promised land of Canaan before he died, the land that God would give to his descendants. Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 through 3 says this: The Lord showed Moses, the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Mediterranean, the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. So from Mount Moab, you could see all of these places where Moses was not allowed to go, but all these places where Israel eventually had their inheritance. So that is a third possibility. Now the fourth possibility is Mount Quarantania. And this is a mountain that is generally known as the Mount of Temptation. It is a limestone mountain about 1,200 feet in elevation and is located about 6.8 miles northwest of the town of Jericho. It does have commanding views of the territories to the east, but its lesser elevation would seem to make it less panoramic than the other mountains in the area. So those are the 4 mountains that I have listed. And I'll let you come to your own determination what you think it is. Now, as we mentioned last week, we should not assume that anything miraculous was meant when the scripture says the devil showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. It is likely that Jesus was at the least able to view all 3 parts of Judea from this high mountain, which were referred to as kingdoms. Kingdoms that were at this time ruled by the 3 sons of Herod, who were called kings. It may be that the devil was using this large expanse of territory as just a small representation of all the kingdoms that he would give Jesus if he would bow down and worship him. And of course, Jesus, after this temptation, told him to leave him. But he didn't leave him forever. He came back at a later time. Okay.
I
Yeah.
love that you're giving all these different options. I love this kind of study. You're doing a great job with it. The coming to your own conclusion, I understand what you're saying there. I'm saying this to benefit everybody. I had to learn a long time ago because I used to drive myself nuts about trying to decide like I had to come to a conclusion of something. There are some things, it's okay if you don't come to a conclusion. It's all right.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't decide, it's got to be one of these, I've got to decide which one. No, you don't. It's all right not to. And I'm not saying that you were saying that. I was just letting everybody know it's okay to not come to a conclusion about something that we're not given.
I said Mount Scopus was, to me, probably the most likely. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, and
I
these
have
other,
no opinion of it. That's what I'm saying, because I have no earthly idea.
Mount Hermon would be a great, because
Yeah.
you could see way, it's the highest mountain. So.
Right.
But no, my point through this whole thing is that when we have opinions, they just need to be based on Scripture. And if you don't have a specific opinion, yeah, that's okay too.
Right.
That's okay too.
If you hold an opinion, you know, and become dogmatic, first of all, you shouldn't do that. Second of all, you better have a passage to back it up if you do that.
Yeah,
Right.
You don't need guesses. You don't even need to talk about your guesses. You need to talk about opinions, which are based upon biblical truth. Okay, I think we'll stop there next week. Question 4, what method is used by Jesus to resist the temptations of Satan? Any other responses before we go on? We'll start there next week. Well, you're not supposed to answer today. That's next week.
Good job, Dan. Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was a good discussion.
You just spoiled everything. That.